Part 1. The Bird in Silence. That afternoon, the playground echoed like a clear piece of music. The patter of children's feet clattered against the hot concrete. A rubber ball bounced up and down, irregular yet lively in rhythm. The swing creaked like an old breath, blending with the pure, innocent laughter that filled the entire yard with the sound of childhood. Carefree and endless, adults stood around the fence, chatting in murmurs. Some carried babies in their arms. Others let their children run freely among the crowd. In that fleeting moment, no one imagined that this fragile piece could be torn apart in a single breath. From above, against the sky fading in the last light of day, a dark shadow dove downward. At first, it was nothing more than a blur, a tiny speck circling the heavens. But quickly, wings spread wide, sharp and majestic like a colossal scythe. The wind hissed through the feathers like blades cutting through the air. A hawk, fierce and commanding, was circling above the children. Around and around it went, each pass lower than the last. And with every circle, the liveliness of the playground began to wither away. The laughter stopped first. A little girl on the swing froze, her wide eyes fixed on the shadow overhead. Soon, the other children slowed down, their shouts faltering, until all of them stood still, gazing upward as if hypnotized. The adults reacted a moment later, but quicker than any warning could be spoken, they rushed forward, clutching their children tightly, fear showing in their eyes. The murmurs ceased, replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the heavy, steady beat of wings above. The gusts from those wings stirred small whirlwinds across the grass, scattering dust and dry leaves into the air like fragments of memory ripped from the earth. People braced themselves for a strike, as if the bird might swoop down and seize a child. A few screamed and dragged their children toward the iron gate, but the hawk did not attack. It did not dive into the crowd. Instead, it continued lowering its circles until the shadow grew larger, stretching over the ground. Then, with one firm motion, it spread its wings wide and landed. The grass bent beneath its talons with a soft sound, then fell silent. Yet what chilled everyone was not its fierce presence, but the place it chose to land. The hawk did not perch on the swing, nor grip the slide, nor snatch at the crumbs of bread nearby. It stood motionless upon a small mound of earth near the fence, where a short, moss-covered stone marker stood, a lonely grave, almost forgotten, lying right beside the place where children played every day. The air tightened with an eerie stillness. The hawk stood tall, not calling, not moving, like a statue of flesh and bone set in the wrong place. At the wrong time, wide eyes stared. Mothers and fathers clutched their children's shoulders. Everyone watching, hardly daring to breathe. No one understood. No one could explain why a wild creature, usually seen only in the high mountains or open fields, had come here, and why it had chosen that very spot, a spot long left unspoken of. And in that moment, in a playground silenced to the core, one haunting question echoed within every gaze. Why would a wild creature choose this place? And why did it stop in absolute silence? Part 2. A Sign from the Past. Daniel stood among the parents. He had only planned to stop by the playground to pick up his son after school. But now, he stood frozen, as if his body were locked inside an invisible frame. Before him, the hawk still perched on the small grave, its eyes sharp as blades, not looking at the people, not at the children, but piercing into some unseen point far away, a place only it could see. The children clung to their parents' hands, whispering softly, but no one answered. Daniel felt his heart racing to the point of suffocation. He had never witnessed anything so strange in his life. He took a step forward. The crowd flinched, and a few voices called out, "Daniel, do not go near it." But he did not hear them. A vague force pulled him toward the grave. His steps were slow, heavy, as if the ground beneath him had turned to mud, dragging each movement out. The hawk did not stir. It stood there, waiting, like a silent guardian of some unseen gate. When Daniel was only a few yards away, he saw it clearly. Clutched in its talons was something faintly gleaming, trembling in the wind, an old ribbon, frayed and faded, yet still showing its delicate weave. Daniel's heart froze. He knew this ribbon. A memory rushed back, a summer day 3 years ago, when his son was still small and often played in this very playground with a neighbor boy. That boy, with a bright smile and a little red bicycle, always tied a blue ribbon to the handlebar. It fluttered like a tiny flag of joy whenever the wheels spun. But that boy was gone. The accident that year had plunged the neighborhood into grief. The child was buried in this very grave, the one beneath the hawk's feet. A chill crept down Daniel's spine. He did not believe in omens, but he could not explain this coincidence. Of all the objects in the world, why would the hawk bring this ribbon? Why would it land here, on the grave of the boy who had once been his son's closest friend? Images flooded back. 2 children riding bicycles around the yard, their laughter echoing, replaying in Daniel's mind like an old film in reverse. He stood still, caught between reliving a memory and touching a darkness without a name. He looked up. The hawk was staring directly at him, not fierce, not threatening, but calm, almost solemn. For a moment, Daniel felt that its gaze carried a message, as if the bird were not merely a creature of the wild, but a messenger sent from somewhere beyond understanding. He heard the blood pounding in his ears, while the world around him faded away, leaving only 3 things: himself, the small grave, and the bird standing guard. Curiosity quickly gave way to unease. Daniel's throat went dry. He swallowed but felt a catch. Could there truly be a connection between the hawk and the lost child? Could it be bearing a sign, not of chance, but of a memory long forgotten, a secret never spoken? Behind him, the crowd still watched. A few whispers rose. Someone urged, "Come back, Daniel, leave it alone, do not get involved." But he did not turn. An invisible pull, stronger than fear itself, drew him one step closer, his eyes fixed on the ribbon trembling in the hawk's talons. In that instant, Daniel knew with certainty this could not be mere coincidence. It was like a message, a call from the past, and he had become the one chosen to hear it. And as that thought took hold, a chill ran down his spine. Daniel was no longer just a witness. He had become part of the story, a story the hawk and the child beneath the grave had begun long ago. Part 3. The Call in the Darkness. The first night after the incident, Daniel could hardly sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hawk standing on the grave, the ribbon trembling in the wind. But what haunted him most was its gaze, calm, piercing, as if it had handed him a mission he did not yet understand. The entire room was swallowed by darkness, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the pounding of his heart. Whenever the wind slipped through the window, Daniel thought he could hear the sound of wings, and he knew that encounter had only been the beginning. He was right. The next day, the hawk returned. This time, it did not bring the ribbon. In the middle of the day, just as the children poured into the playground, the wings thundered in the sky, deep and powerful like a drumbeat of warning. Parents rushed to drag their children inside, while Daniel instinctively stepped forward. The hawk landed on the same grave, but this time in its talons was a dark piece of cloth. Daniel bent down slowly as the bird released it. He picked it up. It was a small, faded shirt, stained with a dark brown patch of dried blood. He remembered clearly, on the day of the accident, that boy had been wearing a white shirt. The coincidence froze his spine, and the chill only deepened when, in the following days, the hawk came again and again. Each time, it carried something different. One day it was a rusted keychain shaped like a tiny soccer ball, caked with dirt, exactly like the birthday gift the children had once given their friend. Another day, its claws held a broken shard of red-painted plastic, part of the boy's bicycle. Then came a cracked whistle that had once belonged to him. Each item was placed like a piece of a puzzle, and Daniel was the only one brave enough to bend down and pick them up. He carried them home, laying them on his table. Every night, he sat before them, staring as if they might speak. But instead of closing the past, they opened deeper shadows. A heavy question gnawed at him, if it truly had been an accident. Why were there so many contradictions? The small town began to whisper. The children grew fearful. Parents forbade them from going to the playground at dusk. But Daniel, instead of avoiding it, felt himself pulled further in. He grew restless by day, sleepless by night. Often he left his bed, threw on a coat, and wandered back to the playground, standing under the dim streetlight to stare at the patch of grass where the grave lay. When the wind rose, the swings knocked together, creaking like sighs from the dark. In those moments, he always thought he could hear the sound of wings, distant but insistent, urging him onward. One night, half dreaming, Daniel followed that sound. He drifted along the empty streets beneath the flickering glow of yellow lamps. The wings echoed above, sometimes near, sometimes far, guiding his steps. He passed silent houses, walked over mossy cobblestones, until he stood before a rotting wooden fence at the edge of the woods. There, the hawk perched on a power pole, its eyes burning in the darkness. It drove one final object onto the ground, a bent, rusted lighter. Daniel picked it up and turned it in his hands. On the metal surface, initials were still engraved. They did not belong to the child. They belonged to an adult. Something shifted inside him. It was no longer just fear, no longer just memory. A new, deeper urge took hold. Every item the hawk had brought was like a reminder. The truth had never been buried peacefully. The fragments, pieced together, revealed a story unfinished, a tragedy that may never have been an accident at all. And Daniel knew, if he stopped now, he would never escape this haunting. But if he kept going, he would have to face a truth the entire town may have chosen to forget. In the heavy night, where the beating of wings still echoed, Daniel whispered to himself, "Could it be that it is calling me to uncover what has been hidden?" Part 4. The Buried Truth. Daniel had never imagined that one day, his ordinary life would be swept into such a dark spiral. But the deeper he went, the less he could look away. The evidence the hawk had carried to him no longer allowed him to remain passive. Each night, when the city fell asleep, he wandered, following the sound of wings in the wind. No one else heard them, only he did, and he believed the call was meant for him alone. One rainy night, just as the clock struck midnight, Daniel pulled on a coat and stepped outside. The neighborhood was dim beneath scattered yellow lights, rain pooling across the pavement, reflecting warped shadows of trees. He walked without direction, guided only by the wings, near, far, vanishing, then returning again, until suddenly, he found himself at the edge of town, a place no one had visited in years. Before him stood an abandoned house, broken windows, a sagging roof, walls scarred with moss. Weeds had grown high over the steps, nearly blocking the entrance. Daniel had never set foot here, yet his chest tightened. Instinct told him everything was converging on this place. On the roof, the hawk waited, its gray feathers soaked by rain, its eyes glowing like twin embers in the dark. It cried out, long and hoarse, echoing through the emptiness. A command. Daniel pushed the door. The rotting wood groaned like a lament. Inside, the air was thick with mold, dust, and rust. He flicked on his flashlight. The beam swept across smeared walls with half-erased writings, broken furniture, scraps strewn everywhere. In the corner lay a rusted child's bicycle, its wheels bent. Daniel stepped closer, bending down. The red paint had faded, but he recognized it instantly. It was the boy's bicycle. The warped frame, the cracked bow, every detail matched his memory. Why was it here, in this forgotten house? He walked deeper, torn papers scattered across the floor. Daniel gathered them under the beam of light. They were fragments of old newspapers, articles about the tragic accident of an 8-year-old boy. But the edges had been cut away. He turned over more scraps, all about the same event, all ripped, cropped, leaving only broken words. Someone had kept them, and someone had deliberately hidden parts of the truth. Daniel's heartbeat thundered. The puzzle pieces were no longer separate. They were aligning, the lighter with initials, the blood-stained shirt, the bicycle hidden in this house. There had been an adult's hand in the tragedy. It had not been random. Something had been covered up, and the whole community had chosen silence. The wings thundered above the roof, heavy as war drums. Daniel looked up, then pushed open the last door. Inside was a small, dim room, walls lined with rusting tools. On a rotting table lay a thin folder, buried among scraps of paper. Daniel opened it and froze. It was the accident report, signed by a town official. But within the testimony, there was a glaring contradiction. The timeline did not match the witnesses' accounts. And one name stood out, the driver of the vehicle that struck the boy, a man admired by the entire town, the owner of a large lumber mill, benefactor to many families. Daniel stood paralyzed. The boy's death had not been just an accident. It was the result of deadly negligence, smothered by lies and silence. The man had been protected. The records altered, the evidence hidden, and that lonely grave by the playground was the last reminder of a truth no one wanted to speak of. The world seemed to sway around him. For a moment, Daniel could hear nothing but his own heartbeat, beating in time with the hawk's powerful wings outside. It was no longer just a bird. It had become a voice, a pressure that demanded he face the truth. He staggered back and collapsed onto a broken chair, his bag drenched in sweat despite the cold air. But choice stood before him: remain silent, preserve peace for his family, allow the town to continue living under its fragile shell of calm, or rise, reveal the truth, and accept the anger, the danger, perhaps even the loss, all for the sake of justice for the child beneath the grave. He lifted his head. Through the shattered window, the hawk spread its wings, scattering droplets of rain that glimmered in the flash of lightning. The beating of its wings boomed like a strike against his chest. In Daniel's eyes, it was no longer just a creature. It was a symbol, the voiceless scream of the lost child, and it was urging him to decide. Daniel clenched the folder in his hands. Lightning lit up the room, revealing his tear-filled eyes. He knew, from that very moment, there was no turning back. Part 5. The wings depart. Morning came slowly. The rain from the night before had left cold puddles across the ground. Daniel stepped out of the abandoned house, the folder clutched tightly in his hand. The scent of damp earth and rotting wood lingered around him, as if the house itself still clung to him, unwilling to let go. On the roof, the hawk remained. It watched him in silence, its eyes glowing like embers in the misty dawn. Then, suddenly, it took flight. The wings sliced the morning air, echoing like the final sound of the night. The hawk soared upward, circling the treetops before vanishing into the pale gray sky. Only the resonance remained within Daniel's chest, a call that had not yet ended. He tilted his head back, following until it was no more than a speck, and then gone entirely. What he felt was an indescribable emptiness, part release, part abandonment. Daniel returned to the playground. At that early hour, it was quiet, only the rustle of leaves whispering in the breeze. He walked to the small grave, the grass still heavy with dew. There, on the moss-covered stone, lay an object, the old ribbon the hawk had once carried. Now it rested neatly, clean, as if placed there with care. His hands trembled as he picked it up, the weight of it like holding the soul of the past. For a moment, his vision blurred, his breath faltered. He stood before the grave longer than ever before. Memories flooded back, the laughter of the boy, the image of his own son holding his friend's hand as they ran across the grass, the red bicycle racing through the sunlight. All of it had been buried, but now, somehow, it had been awakened. Daniel felt as if the boy was still there, standing beside him, present in the hush of the wind. He did not know whether he had been chosen or had simply stumbled into it all. He did not know why the hawk had brought these fragments to him, and not to someone else, but he understood one thing. From this moment on, he was no longer an outsider. He was a witness, the keeper of this story, the one who held the choice of whether it would sink back into silence or be carried into the light. A child's shout rang out in the distance. Daniel startled. Looking up, he saw the children had returned to the playground. They laughed, chasing one another, tossing a ball as though nothing had ever happened. Their footsteps, their laughter filled the wind, blending with the ordinary sounds of the town. For them, it was just another morning. For their parents, it was the return of daily peace. No one knew that beside them, beneath the little grave, lay a story unfinished. Daniel lifted his eyes to the sky one last time. Empty. The hawk was gone, leaving only silence. But this silence was different from the dreadful stillness of the first day. This was the silence of an ending, or perhaps the silence of a beginning. He clenched the ribbon in his hand, tears shining in his eyes, and quietly turned away from the grave. On his way back, the sounds of the playground followed him, vibrant as ever. But within Daniel, something had changed forever. The playground, the grave, and the silent bird, they had carved themselves into him, leaving him with the knowledge that he could never live as he had before. And in the quiet of his heart, a question echoed, haunting as his own reflection. How did it know, and why did it choose me, a mere outsider? Part 6. Compassion Beyond Species. There are stories that need no words. There are truths that require no human witness. They reach us in the most unusual forms: a glance, an object, or, as now, through the wings of a wild creature. Daniel stood on the narrow road, staring at the ribbon in his hand. In that moment, he understood. What had shaken him was not only the memory of a lost child, not only the dark secret of the town, it was the invisible connection between beings that seemed so different. The hawk, with all its freedom and ferocity, had become a bridge between death and life, between past and present, between human and nature. He wondered, was it mere chance, or was it something deeper? Proof of the power of empathy, a force that transcends species. That hawk, without a single word, had given him a message. Truth must be faced. Pain must be heard. Injustice, even if delayed, must still find a voice. With each step home, Daniel felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter, because he had seen, he had understood. Heavier, because the truth now belonged to him, and he must carry it forward. But within him also stirred a fragile hope, that the hawk had not come only to burden him, but to leave him with faith. Faith that, within the silence of mankind, another force still calls out what has been buried. Sometimes, what we need to hear does not come from our own kind. It comes from somewhere distant, somewhere unexpected, a cry in the night, a gaze from wild eyes, a wing landing on a forgotten grave. And in that fleeting instant, we realize every creature on this earth carries the power to remind us, to awaken us, to call forth the deepest humanity within us. As the evening descended, Daniel still saw the wings in his mind, vast and solemn, stretching across the sky, leaving an invisible trail of light and memory. No longer just a bird of prey, but a symbol of connection, a testament that between silence and cry, between truth and oblivion, there will always remain a bridge, compassion beyond species.